Section 1. The Myth of the Struggler. You've always been the one who had to fight. The one no one expected to win. The one who got used to clawing your way out of silence, out of doubt, out of the wreckage that others seemed to walk around untouched. And somewhere along the way, you learned how to make your suffering holy. You made it proof. Proof that you deserved something. Proof that you earned your place. Proof that you mattered. But what happens when the struggle ends? What happens when things start to go right and you don't know who you are anymore? That's the underdog complex. It's the invisible belief that your pain is your purpose, that hardship is your identity, that being overlooked is where your meaning lives. You chase challenge like oxygen. You wear wounds like armor. You secretly believe that if you didn't suffer for it, you don't deserve it. But here's the truth. You can get addicted to the identity of the struggler. You can fall so deeply in love with the story of, I had to earn everything, that you start turning down peace. You start rejecting joy. You start pushing away the life you say you want because it doesn't match the myth you've been living. And the philosopher who helps us understand this better than anyone is Carl Jung. Carl Gustav Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist who helped shape modern psychology in the early 20th century. Born in 1875, he pioneered the study of the unconscious, the formation of identity, and the lifelong process of integrating the parts of the psyche we repress or deny. His work, concepts like the shadow, persona, complexes, and individuation, wasn't just about mental illness. It was about spiritual evolution, about becoming whole. Jung believed that everyone develops what he called complexes, emotionally charged clusters of ideas buried deep in our unconscious. And the underdog complex is one of them. It's not a diagnosis, it's a psychological pattern. It forms when your brain ties together two ideas, I suffer and I am good. And over time you start to equate your value with your pain. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Carl Jung. What you're meant here is that growth often begins in discomfort, that pain is a teacher. But notice what he didn't say. He didn't say you must always be in pain. He didn't say only the wounded are worthy. Pain might wake you up, but it is not where you are meant to live. And yet so many of us live there, permanently. Why? Because we've learned that struggle is where we're safe. Struggle makes us relatable. Struggle makes us respectable. Struggle makes us real. But here's the problem. If you start building your identity on suffering, you'll start sabotaging anything that feels like ease. You'll chase the difficult path. You'll dramatize your life. You'll repeat patterns just to prove that you're still the underdog, even when you're not. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. This is the key. This is what the underdog complex is really about. It's not just your past. It's not just your trauma. It's your unconscious desire to preserve a self-image that feels morally superior because it suffered. You don't want to lose your edge. You don't want to be the lucky one. You don't want to be the person people envy. You want to be the one who earned it. And so you keep earning it, even when you don't need to anymore. Tell me, have you ever stayed in chaos because calm felt fake? Have you ever downplayed your success because you thought it made others uncomfortable? Have you ever rejected help just to prove you could do it alone? That's not strength. That's a complex. And Jung didn't blame people for having complexes. He taught that they're born out of deep emotional logic. The underdog complex might have saved you once. It might have helped you survive. But now it's keeping you from living. There's a part of you that doesn't know who you'd be without a war to fight. There's a part of you that feels invisible when things are good. There's a part of you that believes if the pain ends, your story ends too. But it doesn't. It begins. And that's where we're going next. Section 2. The Identity Trap. You were praised for being strong, for getting through it, for never complaining. You became the one who could take it, the one who didn't need help, the one who kept going when everyone else fell apart. And slowly, without even noticing, your suffering became your signature. That's what makes the underdog complex so powerful. It doesn't feel like a burden. It feels like a badge. You tell yourself, this is just how I am. But what if it's not who you are, just who you had to be? This is where Jung's idea of the persona becomes crucial. The persona is the mask you wear to survive. It's not fake, it's functional. It's who you became to win approval, to avoid rejection, to belong. But if you over-identify with the persona, you forget that there's a self underneath it. You become your act. You start playing the role of the underdog long after the curtain should have dropped. The persona is a system of behavior that is partially dictated by society and partially by the individual's expectations. In plain terms, your persona is the version of you the world liked. And if the world liked you more when you were struggling, then you learned to associate hardship with love. So you kept finding it. You kept choosing partners who needed fixing. You kept taking jobs that didn't pay enough. You kept inserting yourself into situations where you were underestimated, so you could prove them wrong. You began to worship the grind, not because you liked the pain, but because pain meant progress. It made you feel alive. It made you feel virtuous. You know that feeling, don't you? That almost manic pride of telling people how little sleep you got, how hard you hustled, how much you've been through, how no one gave you anything, you earned it all. And while that story may be true, what if it's not serving you anymore? This is the trap. You're not addicted to pain. You're addicted to who you are when you're in pain. Because when you're hurting, you're someone. You're strong, you're focused, you're clear. But when things are calm, you feel lost. You feel guilty. You feel like you're betraying the identity you spent years creating. So you start subconsciously creating chaos again. You ignore red flags just to stay in the fight. You start arguments. You miss deadlines. You take on too much. Not because you want to fail, but because you don't know how to live without a mountain to climb. This is what Sigmund Freud called the repetition compulsion, the tendency to reenact the same emotional situations over and over, even when they hurt us. Because repetition gives us a feeling of control, and it feels safer to suffer in a way you recognize than to succeed in a way you don't understand. You know the cycle. You get close to healing, but something feels off. You feel moments of peace, and you panic. You're about to win, and you self-destroy. That's not coincidence. That's identity maintenance. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Carl Jung. Because if you let go of the struggle, what remains? Who are you if you're not the underdog? You might think success will alienate you. You might fear that people will stop loving you if you stop meeting them. You might believe that peace will make you soft, or worse, invisible. That fear is real and valid. And Friedrich Nietzsche understood it too. He argued that modern morality was built not by the powerful, but by the powerless. Those who were oppressed created value systems that made their suffering sacred. This is what Nietzsche called slave morality, when powerlessness becomes proof of goodness. When we resent strength, but secretly crave it. It is not the strength, but the duration of great sentiments that makes great men. In other words, it's not just about enduring, it's about how long you cling to what once served you. Let's take this further. Think about social media. Think about how people share their trauma, their breakdowns, their hardships. Think about how much more engagement pain gets than joy. We've built a culture that not only normalizes suffering, it monetizes it. We've made trauma a currency. We've made struggle into a brand. And it gets confusing, doesn't it? When you're rewarded for your breakdowns, but ignored in your balance. When people validate your sadness but go quiet when you're finally okay. That's the trap. You start to feel like the only way to be seen is to suffer, and the only way to be loved is to lose. But what if that's not true? What if your peace is just as profound as your pain? What if your calm is just as worthy of applause as your chaos? What if the truest version of you doesn't need a war to feel real? You are allowed to change the story. You are allowed to outgrow the struggle you used to survive. You are allowed to win and not apologize for it. Because the real you isn't found in the fight. The real you is waiting in the silence after you stop pretending the pain still defines you. Section 3. When victory becomes a threat. You say you want to win, but deep down, you don't trust what happens if you do. You've fought so hard. You've carried so much. You've made your entire identity out of the climb. So what's left when the summit is reached? This is the paradox of the underdog complex. You fight to succeed, but part of you is terrified of what happens if the struggle ends. Because without the struggle, who are you proving anything to? Who are you redeeming yourself for? What is left for you to fix? So you sabotage, quietly, elegantly, convincingly. You procrastinate on the last step. You forget to respond. You choose the unstable option. You say you want healing, but you stay loyal to the wound. Not because you're weak, but because the underdog complex has told you, struggle is your brand, success is your betrayal. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Carl Jung. And this is the soul's confrontation. Victory, calm, ease. These are not just outcomes, they are threats to your identity. They force you to ask questions you've spent years avoiding. What if I'm not meant to suffer anymore? What if no one is watching? What if I've already proven myself, and I still feel empty? Jung would tell you that this discomfort is the moment of transition, the threshold between persona and self. Because when you no longer need to be seen as the fighter, you finally have to meet who you really are. And it's terrifying. Your psychic energy has been trapped in this myth for so long. As Jung said, every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol, morphine, or idealism. And yes, addiction to the underdog narrative is a kind of idealism. You get high on the righteousness of pain. You get validated by being the one who overcame. So when you're no longer overcoming, your self-worth starts to collapse. What replaces that story? You start to feel invisible. Not because people don't see you, but because you don't know what version of yourself to offer anymore. Here's a truth no one tells you. For some people, happiness is the most unfamiliar feeling in the world. And what's unfamiliar is often interpreted as unsafe. You'll call peace boring. You'll call help weakness. You'll call rest laziness. Because if you admit that you can accept ease, you might have to admit that you've been choosing difficulty for longer than necessary. And that is a painful reckoning. That's why this part of the journey feels like death. Not a literal death, a psychological one. The death of who you thought you had to be. The death of the story that held you together. The death of the glorified struggle. This is what Jung called the integration of the shadow. The process of embracing the parts of yourself you've exiled. And here's the twist. For you, that exiled part might not be darkness. It might be ease. It might be pleasure. It might be being seen as successful, and letting that be okay. Most people think the shadow is their anger, their jealousy, their envy. But for you, the shadow might be joy. The part of you that believes you're allowed to relax. The part of you that doesn't have to prove anything anymore. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The darkness, here, is the part of you that's afraid of being free, afraid of being average, afraid of being loved without struggle. And this is where Søren Kierkegaard helps us. In The Concept of Anxiety, he writes about the dizziness of freedom, that overwhelming feeling we get when we realize we can choose anything. When you've been defined by hardship, freedom doesn't feel liberating, it feels paralyzing. Because now it's your responsibility to choose how to live, without excuses, without blame, without the safety net of your past. And choice? Choice is terrifying. Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. Soren Kierkegaard. You'd rather suffer in a story you know than thrive in a story you haven't written yet. So you shrink. You go back to what you know. You re-enter the narrative. You call it relatable. You call it humble. You call it real. But maybe, just maybe, it's resistance. Because here's what the underdog complex doesn't prepare you for: peace, mutual love, sustainable success, being believed the first time, being invited in instead of excluded, not having to prove you belong. These things feel foreign, and if you're not careful, you'll reject them just to feel like yourself again. You'll keep the chaos alive, not because you want it, but because it reminds you of who you think you are, but you're not that person anymore. And you don't have to be. Let yourself let go. Let yourself exist without having to fight for it. Let yourself win and then stay. Not everything has to hurt to be real. Not every good thing needs to be earned in blood. Not every version of you needs to be forged in fire. Some of the strongest people are the ones who finally walked away, not from the battle, but from the identity that said they could only be worthy if they were bruised. And maybe, just maybe, you're ready to become someone new. Section 4. Reclaiming strength without suffering. You don't need another lesson in resilience. You've had enough of those. What you need now is permission. Permission to stop identifying with the version of you that only felt real when you were hurting. Permission to let strength mean something other than survival. Carl Jung called this the process of individuation, the psychological and spiritual journey of becoming whole by integrating all aspects of the self, including those we've disowned. And for you, that means integrating peace, integrating softness, integrating the right to exist without always having to earn it. Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. Carl Jung. You don't have to amputate your past. You don't have to deny your story. But you do have to stop repeating it when it no longer serves you. The war is over. Now the real courage begins. Because now, you have to face a kind of power you've never known before. The power of living without pain as your proof. You've spent years learning how to carry things. Now it's time to learn how to set them down. Let go of the myth that says only those who bleed are worthy. Let go of the voice that whispers, "Too easy," every time something good happens. Let go of the fear that if life isn't hard, it must be fake. Because the truth is, you've already proven yourself. You've already climbed the mountain. You've already walked through the fire. And now, it's time to build something. Not just in reaction to pain, but in alignment with peace. This is the quiet revolution Jung invites you into. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you are. You truly are, Carl Jung. And who you truly are is not a symbol of suffering. You are not just a survivor. You are not just what happened to you. You are not just the comeback story. You are a person, alive, present, evolving. And that evolution will ask you to walk away from what's familiar. It will ask you to stop performing pain for proximity. It will ask you to stop making trauma the centerpiece of your worth. You are allowed to write a different ending. You are allowed to shift the storyline from "I overcame" to "I create." You are allowed to become whole, even if no one claps. Stop looking for reasons to suffer. Cut the storylines that only love you when you're broken. Withdraw your energy from people who only recognize you in pain. Reclaim your joy. Reclaim your silence. Reclaim your softness. Reclaim your power, the kind that doesn't require battle scars. Choose your peace, even when it doesn't make sense, especially when it doesn't make sense. Because That's where freedom lives. That's where identity dissolves and the self begins. And that's the real victory. Not that you survived, but that you no longer have to.